Hello, everybody, and welcome to this new lecture in Module 4. This is Week 1's content on cognitive aspects of leadership. And in this lecture, we're going to be discussing these cognitive aspects and explore the crucial role that cognitive processes play in leadership effectiveness. And so we'll examine how leaders think, make decisions, and how they utilize their cognitive resources to guide and influence others. So let's take a look over what we'll cover in this lecture. First, we'll explore the cognitive behavioral system of leadership and how beliefs and appraisals shape leader behavior. Then we'll examine the full range leadership model, moving from passive to active leadership styles. Next, we'll discuss cognitive resources and Fiedler's cognitive resource theory. And finally, we'll analyze the interplay between intelligence and experience and discuss the practical implications of these cognitive dynamics. So let's dive right into our first topic, the cognitive behavioral system of leadership. So as we start with this particular model, this framework is based on the Cognitive Affective Personality System theory, or CAPS for short, and it helps us understand both the consistency and variability we see in leaders' behaviors. CAPS essentially suggests that individuals interpret situations differently, which leads to different behavioral responses. And the Cognitive Behavioral System of Leadership model, as proposed by Dochi et al., suggests that a leader's behaviors are influenced by their core beliefs, specific evaluations, and situational factors, creating a self-reinforcing cycle where actions validate initial preconceptions. And so let's break it down. To better understand this system, we need to look at its core components, starting with core evaluations. At the foundation of this system are core beliefs and evaluations. Now, core beliefs are our leaders' fundamental beliefs about themselves, others, and the world, which influence their stable behavioral tendencies. These core valuations are relatively stable and have a profound impact on the leader's appraisals, expectations, and ultimately their leadership behavior. Essentially, they shape a leader's dispositional tendencies. And so specific evaluations are momentary appraisals of the situation, the leader, others, and the world, which explain their variable momentary behaviors. And these together make up level 1, the cognitive affective system level, and how individuals encode and interpret situations, leading to diverse behavioral responses. Now let's consider these stable core evaluations with more dynamic specific evaluations. And then there are the situational factors. And these refer to the context the leader enters that can modify leadership modalities. For instance, as we see in the image, features 1, 2, and 3 represent various situational factors that a leader encounters. And these can include things like intellectual and social challenges that modify a leader's modalities. These specific evaluations are a leader's momentary appraisals of themselves, others, and the environment. And these evaluations vary depending on the situation and can trigger different behaviors from the same leader. Specific evaluations explain the dynamic state-like aspects of a leader's behavior, which can change from moment to moment. But let's clarify how these two types of evaluations work together. The components discussed help clarify how leaders behave. Now, leadership can be understood as a self-reinforcing cycle. A leader's actions, shaped by their evaluations and the situations they face, can create positive or negative self-fulfilling prophecies that reinforce their initial beliefs. And these actions are influenced by what is known as the cognitive affective system. So, a leader's behaviors can be either consistent or vary depending on their core beliefs and the specific circumstances they encounter. While there are stable patterns in a leader's behavior, the unique evaluations they make allow them to adapt to different situations. And the combination of these stable tendencies and situational evaluations contribute to the complexity of leadership behavior. But let us also consider the interplay between how observers perceive a leader and the leader's inherent biosocial predispositions. So, as we see, this model further entails observers' perceptions, labeled as level 3. And this level is crucial because it represents how others actually see and interpret the leader's behaviors. It's not just about what the leader does, but how those actions are perceived by the people around them, probably their followers, most likely. Importantly, these perceptions can reinforce the leader's own initial preconceptions, potentially creating that self reinforcing cycle. Think of it as like an echo chamber. If people expect the leader to act a certain way, they'll often interpret their actions to fit that expectation, which in turn can reinforce the leader's behavior. Then there's biosocial predispositions, labeled as level 5. And these are the underlying, often deeply ingrained predispositions that influence a leader's cognitive style and overall effectiveness. They shape how a leader processes information, makes decisions, and approaches problem solving. Essentially, they are the leader's inherent tendencies and personality traits that impact their leadership. And understanding these dynamics is crucial for effective leadership development. It highlights the importance of self awareness for leaders, as well as the need to be mindful of how their actions are perceived by others. It also underscores the fact that leadership is not just about skills and strategies, but also about understanding the inherent predispositions that shape a leader's approach. So now that we've explored the cognitive behavioral system, let's shift our focus to another important model, the full range of leadership model. So again, this brings us to the full range model, which presents leadership as a spectrum of behaviors that includes both passive and active approaches. And maybe even not so much of a spectrum, but as more of a plane, as we see exhibited here in this image. So, by understanding how thoughts and beliefs, often referred to as our cognitions, are linked to emotions and behaviors, leaders can drive meaningful change. And this insight provides a strong foundation for effective leadership development. While all leaders exhibit a mix of active and passive behaviors, the balance between them varies from individual to individual. And by exploring this model, we can gain a deeper appreciation for the diverse leadership styles that contribute to effectiveness. One crucial aspect to consider is a leader's cognitive style, which reflects their preferred methods for processing information, making decisions, and solving problems. This cognitive style significantly influences their effectiveness as a leader. Additionally, integrating principles of cognitive behavioral therapy into leadership development can foster self reflection and promote continuous improvement, enhancing the overall growth for the journey of the leaders. So let's take a closer look at these passive and active leadership behaviors. Now, again, this model helps us to understand the differences in leadership behavior across individuals, and all of these should sound familiar as we've discussed them previously. At the passive end, we have laissez-faire leadership, which is characterized by the avoidance of responsibilities. And then moving slightly towards active is a passive management by exception, where leaders only intervene when problems become severe. On the active side, we have active management by exception, and this involves monitoring for mistakes and enforcing rules. Contingent reward leadership is about setting goals and rewarding performance. And both management by exception and contingent reward leadership fall under the category of transactional leadership. Transformational leadership is at the far active end, focusing on motivating and inspiring subordinates. So let's also discuss how leaders utilize their cognitive resources. Now, cognitive resources and leadership effectiveness is about utilizing their intellectual abilities. It's commonly assumed that leadership effectiveness relies on cognitive resources like intelligence, experience, and technical knowledge. However, these resources alone do not guarantee effective leadership. The leadership situation plays a crucial role in determining how much a leader can utilize their cognitive resources. And this is where Fiedler's cognitive resource theory becomes particularly relevant. And we should also consider how leaders utilize cognitive resources. It's important to recall that Fiedler is not new to us. Now, we discussed his earlier work, the least preferred coworker theory, back in chapter 2, as you all should recall, which focused on how a leader's task-oriented or relationship-oriented style interacts with situational control to predict effectiveness. So here, the cognitive resource theory delves deeper into the role of cognitive resources like intelligence and experience within those situational contexts. So Fiedler's theory sheds light on how leaders utilize these resources. And one of the key findings is that a leader's intelligence only contributes to a group performance when the leader is directive and the group members are supportive. Additionally, training and knowledge are only beneficial when the leader is participative and non-directive, thus allowing group members to utilize their knowledge. But let's also consider how stress impacts the use of these cognitive resources. Obviously, stress plays a significant role in how a leader utilizes cognitive resources. It can divert attention away from the task at hand. And of course, being under high stress, the use of intelligence is often hindered. While experienced leaders do tend to perform better as far as managing those roles, but stress often leads to regression and to less mature behaviors to many parties involved. And this leads us to an interesting conflict, the interference between intelligence and experience under stress. So there's an interesting conflict between these two, and it's especially prominent under stress. So in high stress situations, leaders tend to rely on their experience, sometimes at the cost of misusing their intelligence. Conversely, in low stress situations, intelligence is favored, potentially leading to misuse of experience. And this is because brighter individuals often prefer intellectual problem solving, while experienced individuals depend on intuition and past learnings. But it's important to recognize that intelligence and experience can pull a leader in different directions, particularly under varying stress levels. And there's also been reanalysis of lab experiments that provide evidence of this interference. So some of the research that's highlighted in the materials for this week highlights that the research shows that for less intelligent leaders, experience strongly predicts performance. However, for highly experienced leaders, intelligence does not correlate so strongly with performance. But ultimately, the task at hand should guide the leader in deciding when to rely on experience or analytical and creative thinking. But what are some of the practical implications of these findings for leadership? Well, obviously, they're significant. For instance, we need to go beyond just selecting and training leaders based on their attributes. The leadership performance is heavily influenced by the leadership situation, and therefore it's crucial to train leaders and supervisors to adapt and modify the leadership situation to better utilize cognitive resources. And this can include things like stress reduction training, assigning tasks based on leader experience, and teaching leaders to handle stress. But let's wrap up with key takeaways from this material. So, in conclusion, cognitive processes are fundamental to effective leadership. The interaction between stable core evaluations and dynamic specific evaluations shapes how leaders behave. Remember that leadership situations play a crucial role in determining whether leaders can effectively use their cognitive resources. Factors like stress and task complexity can moderate the influence of intelligence and experience. And finally, training, support, and situational modifications can empower leaders to make the most of their cognitive resources.